Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, colleagues. Thanks for joining. We'll give it another minute or two as I see colleagues are slowly joining. Okay. Julia, maybe in the interest of time, we can slowly kick things off. Yeah, please, over to you.
Thanks, Eski. And welcome, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening from to wherever you're joining. It's afternoon for me here in Oslo. My name is Julia, and I'm calling in from the Global Policy Center for Governance. And it's a real pleasure to have you all join in our COP webinar today. Special thanks to Eski for supporting the preparation of this session, and to Stefano and the whole energy team for promoting the session as well. We're really excited today because we'll be sharing with you key insights from our forthcoming report on civic participation in the just energy transition. And this research is part of a project, an initiative, a learning initiative that we've been engaging with the Ford Foundation. So also a really interesting partner for us. That initiative we took forward with two country offices, a country office in South Africa and the one in Nigeria. And the research initiative has an Africa focus, therefore this regional focus. Santiago will introduce the goals and the overall framework of the project and the research. And we will then hear from Eva from the South Africa country office. Jeffrey from Nigeria has unfortunately been called away because he was trying to manage two events at the same time. And now they were supposed to sequence, but now they've overlapped. And so Santiago will also say a little bit about Nigeria as well. As I mentioned, the work is part of a Ford Foundation project that they're running as part of their JECP fund. So it's part of a much bigger process, and we can talk about that at the end a bit more too. Before we jump into the presentations, let me just share the two objectives we have with this webinar today. The first one is, as I mentioned, the idea to present our work and hear your reflections on this research report and see how it resonates with your own experiences. We're about to publish it. We're just in the final stages of publishing it. So this is a great time for you to share your thoughts and get a sneak preview of this report. Secondly, and perhaps even more importantly, we want to look ahead beyond this report and ask for your views and input on how we can translate this rather long report, it's a research piece, into a practical product that can help country offices in promoting civic engagement during green just energy transitions, or green transitions more broadly. So here we're really keen to hear from you in what format and with what focus we should develop this knowledge product to make it most useful for all of you. So we're just at the beginning of developing this. We're trying to conclude that by December, and your recommendations and input will be really critical at this time. That's why we're doing this webinar right now. Before we jump in, just to say thank you to all the teams that have contributed so far to this research, includes the energy team, the nature team, the climate team, and of course the entire governance GRP hub. So it was a true team effort. I'll leave it at that, and I'll hand over to Santiago to kick us off. Thank you.
Thank you, Julia. So yeah, just maybe to introduce this project, I would like to talk a little bit about what we try to do during this initiative. As Julia mentioned, this is part of a broader collaboration with Ford Foundation as part of their Just Plus Energy Fund. Basically, we're working with different type of learning partners and also partners in the field of Ford, trying to discuss how we can promote just energy transitions in the context of Africa, but also trying to get learnings that we can translate or we can put them into place in other regions of the world. So overall, this initiative had two main objectives. As Julia mentioned, we are focusing on the role of civic participation in just energy transition processes. And on the one hand, we try to evaluate the inclusiveness of these processes in terms of who is actually included, who is actually having a say in the planning and implementation of these plans. And secondly, assess whether participation leads to just outcomes. So basically, we see that there is a lot of research in terms of who is actually involved, how they are involved, but there is less information about to what extent this type of participation or this participation leads to more inclusive outcomes. So in our initiative, we try to do both. We try to compare both the processes, but also the final content of these processes. We analyzed two countries. We focus on the just energy transition ongoing processes in South Africa and Nigeria. Evan will talk a little bit more about Africa, and I will introduce briefly the Nigerian energy transition process. And in terms of the how, basically, we conducted a broad secondary literature review of civic participation in just energy transitions and environmental politics in general. And we tried to focus on what we frame as civic programmatic participatory institutions. So by this type of concept, we mean those institutions, those platforms of participation that are basically endorsed and prompted by the states. So we are not focusing on bottom-up initiatives, although we mention them in the project, but basically we try to analyze those top-down formalized processes. We adopt a political economy analysis. I will talk about this a little bit more in the next slide, but basically we try to look at the power dynamics in terms of actors who are involved, how institutions shape, how they participate, and to what extent they can influence the process. And also we combine that with the UN ECOSOC principles for effective governance. That is, we try to focus on how accountability, inclusiveness, and effectiveness are actually shaping these processes. More broadly, we basically did a desk review, follow-up in-depth desk review, but also we complemented it with different interviews with key stakeholders in both countries. In terms of the analytical framework, we basically adopted a three-step analysis. The first two steps are oriented towards the policy process itself. Basically, we began by describing these civic programmatic participatory institutions in energy transitions. We adopted and created a typology of institutions, of participatory institutions based on the policy stage in which civic actors are engaged, and also the degree of inclusiveness. That is, to what extent this is open to the whole spectrum of stakeholders interested in the topic, or just to a number of them. Then we basically assess how these civic programmatic participatory institutions work in practice, and we focus on both formal and informal enablers and disablers of these processes. And the last step of our analysis focus on the policy outcomes. That is, we basically analyze the results of this participatory process and the extent to which these platforms of participation translate civic demands into actionable policies or outcomes. Before going into the cases, we would like to basically stress the main kind of message we propose in the report. Basically, we analyze both cases in Nigeria and South Africa, and we basically try to endorse this idea that we really need to move forward a real co-production of energy transitions. So by basically analyzing both enablers and disablers, formal and informal, we see that even though we may have formal institutions in place, we need to change power dynamics in societies in a way that they can level the playing field. So that is the key challenge that we see nowadays in these processes. And we finished the report by actually introducing 3 key levels in which we can work on to actually reshape these relationships in each country. First, institutional level entry points, that is how we can design a new type of institutions for a more continuous and substantive participation of civic stakeholders. Then political interventions, that is strategies to increase the interest of people in this process, but also reduce the undue influence of certain stakeholders. And finally, technical entry points. That is what type of innovations we need to actually bridge the representation gap between those making the decisions and those who are actually trying to inform and influence those final outcomes. So before giving the floor to Evan, I would like to just introduce a little bit about the Nigeria's energy transition process. Basically, we first try to understand what are the demands that people have in the Nigerian case, and we see that we can distinguish between 3 types of justice demands. So on the one hand, we have distributive demands that basically focus on job creation, energy access, and also the pace of transition, to what extent this transition is being done too fast, that actually impact the economic situation of communities. Then we also see a lot of demands for procedural justice, that is basically a demand for consultations during the process and not ex post the plan is implemented, and mainly restorative justice demands, that is concerns around like environmental damage, but also land dispossessions in oil and gas regions of the country. We then try to analyze how the institutional process actually took place, and we frame it in the project as a strategic policy circle. That is a participatory process that actually is mostly exclusive, in the sense that is focusing on technocratic expertise, and that is basically also focusing or implemented during the design of the policy, not ex post. So we also have some questions about the implementation of this energy transition plan. And based on these 2 scenarios, we focus on how the energy transition plan in Nigeria responded or not to these demands. And we basically see that given that there is only like an exclusive and mostly technocratic participation of stakeholders, the final outcome of the energy transition plan is mainly focusing on distributed justice, while other type of demands of citizens like procedural and restorative justice are largely unaddressed. So with that, I will give the floor to Evan so he can go more in depth into the South African case. The floor is yours, Evan. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Santiago. Hopefully I'm audible. Oh, perfect. Thank you so much. As Julia mentioned, my name is Evan Jacobs. I am the head of solutions mapping within UNDP South Africa. And I will just be giving an overview around the just energy transition, or JET, within South Africa. Next slide, please. Great. So South Africa's energy system has long powered its economy, right? But it has also played a significant role in reinforcing the country's social and racial divides, right? So under apartheid, energy policy mirrored broader systems of racial segregation, right? So cheap coal energy supported white-owned industries and urban development, while black townships and rural areas were excluded from reliable electricity. So communities in coal regions often face poor air quality, health problems, and limited economic diversification. All of these conditions are tied to this historical marginalization. So with 80% of our electricity still coming from coal, unfortunately, that legacy continues today. That, in combination with an aging coal fleet, rising costs, and persistent grid instability due to outdated infrastructure, has made energy one of South Africa's clearest tests of its governance, justice, and its democracy. Right. So the just energy transition seeks to transform the system, not only through decarbonization, but by embedding three forms of justice into how that transition unfolds. So this mirrors the three forms of justice that Santiago spoke about. So it is the distributive justice, so ensuring that costs and benefits of the transition are shared fairly, so creating new livelihoods and supporting coal communities and all those associated with the coal industry as it gets phased out. The second one is advancing procedural justice. So this involves, workers within the coal industry, civil society, local communities in shaping decisions about not only energy and the broader network, but also the environments in which they live or have been forced to live. And the last one is also restorative justice, but here it differs a little bit slightly from the Nigerian example. Here it's around addressing those historical inequalities that left sort of Black and rural populations excluded from reliable and affordable energy, and the opportunities around sort of the economy that surrounds energy. So within this context, you can see that civic participation has become essential, right? So how government, business, labor, and communities engage with each other, that will determine whether this transition delivers justice in practice, right? Or simply whether it becomes another top-down reform that continues to leave people behind. Great. Can I get the next slide, please, Santiago? So South Africa has built one of the most structured frameworks for a just transition on the continent. And at its center is the Presidential Climate Commission, which is an independent multi-stakeholder body established by the president. And its purpose is to bring together those institutions, government, labor unions, business, together with academia and civil society and traditional leaders to facilitate a just and equitable transition towards sort of low emission and a climate resilience economy. The PCC also coordinates the Just Energy Transition Investment Plan, which is the $8.5 billion deal to help South Africa decarbonize its economy that was struck at COP26 in 2021. So this is a partnership not only with South Africa, but also France, Germany, United Kingdom, United States, and the European Union to provide the resources necessary to achieve these goals as set out through our nationally determined contribution to the Paris Agreement. So contrary to the Nigerian example, where there it's an inclusive, more technocratic approach, South Africa operates more on an open policy lab, which is a system in which broad participation in policy making, rather than narrow consultation with, technocratic or technical leads, will sort of inform the sort of policy cycle around energy. So this approach gives South Africa sort of a strong visibility. So essentially what happened is the PCC engaged in various stakeholder contributions with local communities at the beginning stage of these just energy transition, even before the JET framework or the investment plan was developed. So I think maybe just moving on to what worked and more importantly, what didn't work. So what we found through our consultations is, yes, South Africa has made significant progress in institutionalizing participation, right, within its JET process. The PCC has created also a permanent platform. It's in the form of a website where government, labor, and business can continue to engage and provide feedback. And obviously, based on what I said earlier, this is a major departure about how energy policy has traditionally been done in South Africa. Also, the political commitment by the presidency, strong involvement through the various labor unions around coal mining communities, and mobilization about the civil society has helped keep, at least at the beginning stages of this process, that consultation and participatory approach clear. So at the design stage, participation has been very real, it has been very meaningful, and it has opened up the policy space where civil society can contribute. However, there have been some limitations to the approach. The main one being this openness has unfortunately not been sustained throughout the entire process. Engagement was strong during design, but it has weakened during implementation and especially in the monitoring, which I will get to a little bit later. But in short, there hasn't really been monitoring mechanisms in place, not only to absorb all the information coming from civic society, but also to push those findings back to the community as well. Another issue is that the influence remains uneven. So well-resourced actors, unions, corporates, larger NGOs, they continue to dominate the conversation, whereas grassroots organizations and local communities struggle to participate meaningfully due to often a lack of access to information, technical knowledge, or even, the ability to attend these national dialogues. And once again, most importantly, there's weak accountability mechanisms to show how these civic inputs have been incorporated into final policy decisions. And also, the result is that the communities themselves, the information, their sort of input is not being fed back to them. So they really have no clue whether their input has been used in the way that it's intended. Next slide, please. Let me just see. Yeah, next slide, please. Great, thanks. So I just maybe wanted to touch on a little bit how the country office has adapted to the situation. So in close consultation with the PCC, early on we realized that these dialogues and these national conversations, the momentum was not consistent. It was not strong. So what we did is we developed our own sort of participatory approach, really focused around understanding whether the communities, the people in coal mining communities, actually understand what JET is and what its actual real effect is going to be for their livelihoods. So what we did is we conducted a survey with over 10,000 people across Mpumalanga and Limpopo. Those are two provinces in the country where coal mining is exceptionally strong. But instead of us doing the participatory and the surveys, what we did is we partnered with a company who then went into the various communities, and we found people in those communities to do the surveys on our behalf. And a little bit earlier than that, we also had a consultative session with them to actually ensure that the questionnaire was appropriate at the appropriate level. And obviously, because it was local community asking the questions, issues around trust wasn't an issue. Issues of language wasn't an issue either. And what we found there is that, yes, there was a general understanding of what JET is and what the sort of phase outs and the word is slipping my mind now, but the shutdown of the progressive shutdown of all the coal mines and power plants. They had an understanding about that, but they didn't know how it was going to affect their livelihoods. So they weren't clear on the actual timelines, what that meant, whether they had to move, find new jobs, relocate, all of these interesting facts. But what was interesting is that there was a real willingness for them to engage. They wanted to be part of this consultancy process. No, it's fine. You can leave. You can move to that slide. I'll thanks. And they really wanted to be essentially actors in their own future. So yeah, and I think that was really great. And what we did then is we passed these findings on to the Presidential Climate Commission. But, unfortunately, like civic participation, there's no real monitoring mechanism. So we're not quite sure how our impact has influenced that. And yeah, I think maybe what I wanted to do then is just maybe give some practical recommendations. So these are informed by the South African context, so please keep that in mind. But I think some of these lessons are easily transferable. Some of them are exceptionally obvious, but I think it's worth reinforcing them as well. First, obviously, civic actors need to be directly involved in the decision-making bodies, right? Not just invited to consultations. So they need to be there needs to be a chair at the actual table for a representative, whether it's from a labor union. What we found is these internal sort of, staff associations within the mines have significant power and sway over the coal mining communities, and they speak on behalf of a whole community. Second, engagement must be sustained, right? Implementation and monitoring is essential to ensure that communities have ongoing visibility and influence. They need to make sure, or they need to see that they are being heard, if that makes sense. Third, information needs to be shared in formats and languages that local people understand. It's not an issue of whether they understand the technical information, but for example, within the Zulu and Xhosa language, there is no term for global warming, right? It's not like there isn't an understanding of global warming, but you can't just put global warming into Google Translate and expect it to get across. So language matters, experience matters, and how it's delivered matters as well. So people tend to have an aversion to speaking to government and even to development agencies like UNDP, but they're more than willing to speak to someone who they believe has their best interest in heart. Fourth, funding needs to be set aside for participation, right? Dedicated funding needs to cover not only the actual participatory events themselves, but even to the minute things: travel, translation, digital access, community facilitation, feedback. Dedicated funding is essential. And finally, policymakers should be required to report publicly on how civic inputs is used. As I say, if people don't feel like their words are going anywhere, the next round of participation isn't going to happen. So I think just in closing, the South African experience demonstrates that establishing participatory structures and organizations like the PCC is a strong start, but participation must be backed by access, capacity, and accountability. And I think in conclusion, SA's journey, its continuing journey, shows both progress and unfinished work, formal inclusion at the top, but still limited empowerment below. And the real test of justice will be whether citizens move from being consulted to being partners in shaping the transition itself. Thank you very much, Santiago.
Thank you.
I'll jump in here. Santiago, should I come in?
Yep.
Yeah, great. Well, thanks so much, both Santiago and Evan, for your presentations. I hope that was helpful to give you a sense of where that research went and what you can expect more of in the full report. I think, Evan, hearing you share these experiences makes me think that it feels quite typical, the challenges that you're describing, that a lot of consultation happens at the beginning, and then you mentioned it, there's access issues, capacity issues, accountability issues in terms of feedback loops. And I think we've all heard that, especially also in South Africa, there have been fallouts, there have been remaining tensions because of that gap of, closing the loop, so to speak, with people who've been consulted. And I think it also really shows the complementary role that UNDP country offices can have in what you described, like trying to help broaden the outreach, linking with communities, even with regard to languages, and then at least trying to feed into the political process and improving that more in the medium and long term. Because, of course, in the end, it cannot be done continuously from a UNDP country office, but it can inspire political actors to develop their processes further. Super insightful already. I find I have lots of questions. We now have about 10, max 15 minutes for questions from colleagues online. And then we'll move into our inquiry for you on how we can turn this into a useful knowledge product that is shorter than this research report. And we can also, in your questions and responses, you can already go there if you want. We don't have to do that sequentially. So you can feel free to share questions and frank questions with the colleagues here online, but also already provide suggestions on what would be useful for you. This is internal, so feel free to be frank and really inquire on what worked or what didn't work, as Evan said. And just to say that Santiago, we didn't introduce you properly, Santiago. He's also part of the Global Policy Center for Governance. So, any takers already? I know of one colleague who's keen to share some thoughts already, but I'm going to check if we have other hands up. Yeah, there's Andrea. Oh, and there's a second one. So Andrea first. Thanks, Andrea.
Thanks, Julia, and thanks, colleagues. I mean, I think it's a very important topic, and I really congratulate you to have started this work and this conversation. And I think that, I mean, participatory governance, of course, is very highly relevant for just energy transition agendas, but I think it's a key topic for many transformative agendas and development agendas that we can find across Africa and of course across our global work. I think, I mean, we can all agree on the need to actually ensure participatory governance function well, both on the, let's say, ex-ante side to actually inform policy design in a very constructive and let me repeat here, participatory way, as well as the ex-post part where you need to actually ensure the continuity of this participation process to ensure accountability and monitoring. And I think what looks for me very important for UNDP is on how we could. I think there is
someone has their mic open. Can you close your mics, please? Back to you, Andrea.
Thanks. I think what I would be interesting to explore a little bit further with you is how UNDP can actually position and work supporting those two sides, and going back to one of the definition on how we could actually provide support on the de jure side, working with government authorities in defining the right processes and governance approach and institution that will enable the participatory governance, and at the same time work on the de facto side by supporting, I think, civil societies, entities, and to be capacitated to actually be relevant in this process. So I'm happy to hear also from the other colleagues from additional country offices. I mean, we heard from Evan. Thanks a lot for your presentation on the South Africa example, which I think it's a very relevant one and probably the most comprehensive example that we have across the continent. But we also, for me, interesting to hear from other colleagues in other country offices how they see UNDP could actually play a role in their countries on those two aspects. Thanks.
Thanks a lot, Andrea. Yeah, and that goes to what our role could be to bridge those two challenges at least. So now to Alexandra.
Yeah, thanks so much, colleagues, for this and for the presentation. Maybe just one quick and simple question. Are there any examples of new and innovative local platforms where people can discuss and monitor projects, referring to the last slide you have?
So that's, I think that's a question to Evan, right? On the South Africa case, Alexandra?
Yes, or any other specific country level platforms that are new or innovative so far.
And even in other countries, yeah.
Yeah.
So I'll pass that to Evan and Santiago or other colleagues on the call who might want to share experiences from their countries or regions. Evan, do you want to go first?
Sure. Platforms, yes. Innovative, I'm not sure. I think they're pretty kind of bog standard on how you can, submit your ideas through, questions and text boxes. But what I have found is interesting is based off of discussions from the respondents. I don't think in terms of the sharing of information back to them, which is a main issue, doesn't have to be too innovative, because what they really look to understand these policies, procedures, all of that is traditional media, right? So radio is a big one, especially local radio, television, all of that stuff. So I don't think it's a great answer to your question, but I think in looking for the innovative platforms as well, I think we should also consider what some of the traditional methods and the methods in place that we could maybe leverage a little bit better.
Thanks, Evan. That's actually an interesting one. Sometimes it's not necessarily innovation that's needed, but traditional means of communication. Santiago, anything to add?
Yeah, I have two thoughts on this, Julia, because I think Andrea's comments actually lead us really well to the second part of this Q&A or discussion that we want to have. But in terms of innovation, I think Valentina was here before from the Nature team. But I think there are like some innovative interventions, especially around like environmental governance program, around like data creation and monitoring with citizens that we can also learn from. And luckily, I think she's not here anymore. But yeah, I think we should also have a look at that, at those projects and those processes, because they can also teach us where to go, not only like in energy transitions, but broadly speaking, in environmental governance as a whole. And then I think, Andrea, your question actually leads, as I said, really well, or fits really well into what we are expecting moving forward. And I think we have some questions for the audience actually, and to have your input, because what we want to do now is, okay, we have this diagnosis, but we want to have more practical action. We want to think how we can actually translate this into more programming support for country offices. And here, again, what we are trying to look at, and I think it aligns with what you said, is how we can work with governments in trying to like reshape institutions more formally speaking, but also what type of actions we can actually promote, endorse, or even support to actually change those de facto kind of experiences, and trying to like reshape the civic space in a way that certain stakeholders have more say in the final process and the final outcome of these processes. So here, yeah, Evan.
Sorry, I can't see where to put up my hand, but another platform just came to my mind now. It's called amandla.mobi, but essentially it's a text-based messaging platform that connects community organizers with tools for mass mobilization, public campaign building. I'll put is there a chat function in this meeting?
Yes, it is.
Okay, I can't see it. But maybe what I'll do then is I'll just share the links with you, Santiago, and you can just pass it on to Alexandra.
Sure, Evan. Thank you. So yeah, as I was mentioning, so we are thinking and we are in the design phase of this new knowledge product, in which we try to see how we can translate these findings into more practicable recommendations. And here we have some questions for the audience, and any type of recommendation, comment will be really grateful. So on the first hand, we want to know how do you think this product should look like? We have some conversations with colleagues, and we had some options in mind, like a compendium of resources or best practices, or whether like a checklist that is more like practical. And then, if you have any type of resources, it can be related to the energy landscape, environmental governance, but also beyond, that we can reference in the document and that we can learn from to actually create this new initiative. And finally, of course, if you would like to be involved in the process, and in what way. And so, yeah, I don't know, Julia, if you want to add anything.
No, that's perfect, and we can move into that. There's also, of course, the option of combining some of these elements. So, for example, draw on the framework that we've developed for this research, which could be quite useful for people to see which category of mechanism does our situation in my country fall into more, and then also have some best or at least promising practices. So it could be a combination too, although we want to make sure that it's not too long and maybe not beyond 10 pages or so. Yeah, so any thoughts and suggestions are very welcome. Anna, I see you have your hand up.
The voice sounds familiar, as I used to be put with the UNDP, and I'm back. So still transitioning from HQ to working directly with colleagues at the Rome Center. So I apologize if this sounds out of character. A couple of things have come to mind, not necessarily first with these questions. As a gender specialist, one of the things that comes up, or the question to you, is whether or not during your research you saw particular difficulties of specific groups. And I didn't see that coming from the presentations, and maybe it's because the time is so limited, right? So I heard the challenges with the time, but not necessarily if you've encountered difficulties. I mean, of course, I would say reaching to women, LGBTQ plus groups, but I'm also thinking people with disabilities, or different ethnicities, or within a particular country. So again, just because part of the just transition would be for us to be very conscious about how we need to go more granular in our analysis. So that's the first one. And then also thinking, I know this is funded by Ford Foundation, and that you have a Sub-Saharan Africa and RBA context, but I know colleagues in ARBEC have been also working on the just transition, and it might be worthy to double check with them. I'm very happy to put you in touch with colleagues who are working on that. Again, just to think maybe about the good practices or other resources that they can make available. And I see colleagues from the Global Gender team and also Irania, who are gender specialists. So maybe also, to in-house check for good practices on how, through maybe learning from NDC processes, the NAPS processes, and so forth, how to make sure that we are putting within the recommendations very key guidance, and also inviting governments to keep the gender machineries involved, which is something that we may not necessarily see. So this is a lot of things. Apologies if it's not on the protocol or answering your questions, but just wanted to put it on the table, and also happy to, have bilaterals if you'll find that useful. Thank you. Over.
Thank you, Anna, and it's fully on point and super helpful. And I'll ask Evan and Santiago to come in on both how the research framework reflected the point on inequality and marginalized groups, or groups in specific situations, both the framework and in South Africa specifically, what the results were. And on your second point, to liaise and check in with other regions on this plant knowledge product. That's actually an important point I was going to make. The research was funded by Ford and focused. They had an Africa focus, but for our knowledge product, we don't want to focus on one region. So it will be a global product. That's actually why we are sharing it today with all of you, so that you can flag where there is a need and where there are experiences that we should look into. And we are indeed, and Santiago can say more about this, working already very closely with both the climate team and the Istanbul hub. So that's it's great that you're mentioning it, because it means that we've engaged with the right teams and colleagues. And of course, we're planning to also engage with the other regional hubs. On this research so far, we've mostly engaged, of course, with the regional hubs in Africa, but we'll expand that. Evan and Santiago, and then we have a few more questions.
I can jump in. So yeah, thank you, Anna, for the comments. So gender was, so maybe just to clarify a little bit more about the initiative with Ford. So Ford had the idea of funding different learning partners that would focus on different aspects of the just energy transition. As part of this initiative, there is a team that actually is working on gender. I can happily put you in touch with them. It's a NGO in Zimbabwe. And they work mostly on gender and in the mining sector and in some cases in the energy landscape. That said, while in our case, the focus was on institutions, so the idea was that we reflect on the governance aspect, the more institutional aspect of these processes. We saw gender as a core part, a constitutive part of this issue in the report, and we will share with you once it is published. We discuss how gender and also youth are two groups that actually have specific challenges in these processes, and how like governments in both Nigeria and South Africa are trying to like acknowledge these inequalities, historical inequalities and structural inequalities. But yeah, this is something we would like to maybe delve more into, like in this new knowledge product. And I see Verania has raised her hand. We discussed this briefly as well some weeks ago during Climate Week. But yeah, if we can also be in touch with the Arabic colleagues, that would be great, so we can have more resources to look into. Evan, I don't know if you want to add something.
Yeah, just two quick things to add. Yeah, I think it's an excellent point around Jen, and we have to be very targeted in our approach, because what we found in sort of our surveys and stuff, within South Africa, there are a lot of cultural norms around women that sort of hinder participation. All right. So that, and then a second thing that's just as important, because going into this, we focus primarily on, coal mining communities. So when we say coal mining communities, we often just think of the coal miners, right? But there's a whole secondary ecosystem within these communities that are run by women, right? Because the men are down in the mines, and the women have this whole economy that actually runs the coal mining community as well. And the just energy transition will flip that as well. So we have to be very targeted around equality moving forward. Thanks.
Thanks. That was very illustrative, Ivan. Thank you. Andrea, and then Verania.
Thanks, Julia. And I mean, very quickly, two points. On one point, just to confirm that, I mean, the Sustainable Energy Hub will be very happy to actually be involved in the process and be associated with work. I mean, we have a global presence, and we can also support you in collecting best practices and examples from the different UNDP regions if the knowledge product is meant to be global. On a second point, on how the final knowledge product could look like, and what would be the type of work that could be the most useful, I think that one thing that I see and I sense as a need from country offices, at least here in RBA, is also having a clear understanding of not the general best practices, but actually the UNDP functioning approaches that have been tested by other country offices or by other entities and could be easily replicated in other contexts that may present similar conditions. Of course, this will then have to be adjusted and shaped based on the local context, but knowing that we have ready to use approaches, methodologies, tools that already provided impact and outcomes in this space, I think is something that CEOs appreciate, because then it can also show that we have the capacity to quickly implement and support governments or civil society groups in that sense.
Thanks, Andrea. And that makes me think that one thing that the knowledge product could do also is have like a signposting function, where, you know, because not all of this is new, we are getting again into the sort of participation in natural resource management, especially because of critical minerals and the energy transition. But a lot of this, these challenges around participation are not new and are relevant in other sectors too. And there are there's broader guidance from UNDP and beyond that can be used. So it could even be useful to just sort of compile those, right? So that people don't have to, we don't reinvent the wheel, first of all, and people don't have to kind of Google that, but just sort of to bring them together in one place. And that could be resources from the global level, from country level. Verania, great to see you. Verania, the floor is yours. See, I think she may have an issue with her mic. We can come back to her. Any thoughts? Any other thoughts from anybody else on the?
Julia, can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me now? Okay,
Absolutely.
fantastic. So hi, Julia, Santiago, colleagues. Oh, great, thank you. Sorry, I'm in transit, so that's why I've been so quiet. But anyway, so thank you so much for the invitation and the presentations. I mean, this is really good to see and quite interesting. As Santiago mentioned, Santiago and I met and have discussed, you know, our kind of like in future or in the near future collaboration. And so we have a plan. I think this is really interesting to see. I just wanted to share a couple of things. So one, I think the most important thing of a knowledge product, whether this is a methodology or a tool as a checklist, or is to really have a programmatic platform to be operationalized. And I think that's, you know, where somehow, you know, we come in and where I think the synergies that we can build between, you know, Climate Hub work and, you know, our programmatic platforms, such as, you know, the Climate Promise, which we are now revisiting for the next phase of implementation, become very crucial. And so in that sense, I think I'm very happy to support and collaborate around this knowledge product. And I think we can identify very concrete ways and entry points in which we can operationalize and implement the recommendations in that sense. So I just wanted to keep this in mind and make sure that we continue to connect and to build in these recommendations into the just transition strategy that countries are implementing on the one hand, and also on the other, as part of our new framework, we have one area or component related to engagement, inclusion, and equity. So I think that it would be quite useful to continue the conversation. So just wanted to share that. And Anna, welcome back. Very happy to see you. And we will also need to catch up, I guess. So thank you, colleagues. Over, Julia. Thank you.
Thanks, Verania. And nice to see that we can even connect colleagues who are in New York. I know it's a big city. So that's great points, Verania. And what you're saying, it feels really important, because one thing is the guidance, but then people need to also know who can help them apply it and where they can direct questions, right? So I think that's what you're referring to, like technical support, perhaps even financial, and to connect it to programmatic work. Excellent. So that's the last chance. We've got like 4 minutes left. We're about to wrap up. If there are any other questions or suggestions or just reflections, please share. I know we have a few people from country offices as well, other than Alexandra, who shared her thoughts earlier. So last chance. I can't see any hand up. So then we'll start wrapping up. It's been a real pleasure. Super useful insights and suggestions. Thank you very much for your time today. We'll be in touch and share the report once it's officially published, and of course updates on our on this new knowledge product. Esty will be in touch to share with you a quick survey after the webinar to gauge your thoughts on how this session was, and you can also share there if you would like to be further involved in this work that we've described today. We've already noted down some of you've mentioned their interest, but that's another chance to flag that to us. And please feel free to just reach out to us individually as well, of course. So thank you very much and have a great rest of the day. Thanks to the team again, and see you all again soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.